we're just capturing photons around the world and reconstructing. It's wonderful. Space has a long history of driving innovations of technologies on Earth. We go to space to improve life here on Earth. We're one planet is something the world needs more than ever. If you put an object into low Earth orbit, it's visiting the whole planet.
Hello and welcome everyone to yet another episode of the Space Talk, and we have a very special guest with us today, Enrico here from the Australian Space Agency. He's the head of the Australian Space Agency, and I am absolutely honored and very excited to be talking to you, Enrico. Thank you so much for taking out the time speaking with us here today about space.
Thank you. It's great to join this podcast in your series, and it's been a wonderful week so far in India.
How did your love for space start, and what does space mean to you?
My love for space started really as a teenager.
Yeah.
And it was, there was a few things. One were interplanetary probes like Galileo, when it was headed off to the outer reaches of the solar system. Just, the ability for humans to build these robotic systems and to send them out in exploration. We had Dr. Andrew Thomas, who was an Australian, who flew both on the Mir space station and the space shuttle, and seeing an Australian do that was very inspirational. And I'm sure there was a bit of Star Trek mixed in there as well along the way.
Yeah. Could we say that could be your, I like to give this term, that cosmic connect moment. So do you think that watching, like you said, there was Galileo, watching him go to space, and then of course Star Trek moments, you think those could be your cosmic connect moments?
Yeah, I think they came together. I always had an interest in engineering from a young age, but it's the harshest environment for humans and for us to design technology.
Yes.
And so it requires, the deepest levels of science and integration and technology.
True. So if I asked you, what does space mean to you? What is the first thing that comes to your mind?
We go to space to improve life here on Earth. Right. I think you're probably well aware when you look at the climate variables that we use to understand the planet, more than 50% of them we have to sense continuously from space. So we have to go to protect and look after our planet. But of course, space is a source of inspiration. I mean, that image when it came from the James Webb Space Telescope, it captured the world.
Yeah, it did.
And we know space is that spark of curiosity that gets kids into science and maths. And not necessarily, they might not end up in a space career, but it gets them into the studies, into the careers, and there's a diverse set of disciplines you need in space.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I remember when the images came from GWST and I was putting some of the content out, and one of my friends who is absolutely not interested in space, and she sees that video and she's asking me, okay, what is the whole big deal about these images? And I try to explain, and when suddenly they get an idea that how huge this whole thing is and where we are, there's a little perspective shift that happens. And I think that's the beauty of it. When I saw that personally with her, I think that was for me that this is what space science can do.
Absolutely.
And to know that, humans have made something like this, which is so far away from us and giving us these kind of views, and how it shifts everything, it's just beautiful and mind-boggling.
And there's multiple examples. I agree, whether it was the images a couple of years ago, the black hole imaging, a few months ago, Shavaya Falls on Mars, and seeing a rock that looks like something we might see on Earth. And it's tantalizing, right? We're going to get the sample back, but it's tantalizing to know, are we alone in the universe? And and so year on year, those discoveries are increasing and they're inspiring the world.
And it's for me personally, space and universe in itself is extremely inspiring. But just also the fact how humans are working towards creating technologies like this, like you mentioned, the black hole image. I mean, Event Horizon Telescope is a mind-boggling example of how we brought together that entire technique to create an Earth-sized telescope and then capture that image. I mean, it speaks volumes of what humans can do, and I think it in itself states we are meant to explore and go beyond. Right?
I agree. It's in our DNA, and we're just capturing photons around the world and reconstructing. It's wonderful. And that science, though, these are creating technology. Space has a long history of driving innovations of technologies on Earth. You know, Apollo is a good example with fire retardant materials, water purification systems. You know, all these things have been developed because when you design and engineer things for space, you need a different mindset.
Absolutely.
You know, water recycling on the International Space Station is high 90%. We don't do that on Earth, and we need to. We need to.
If we can do that, we could be recycling so much more water and less of wastage. So that's again a very simple example of how space technology can actually help us on Earth itself, which is something a lot of times people do tend to question. So if you come across these kind of questions, so how do you try to answer them?
Yeah, as a head of a space agency, it's a question you face in all different audiences, from children to adults to politicians. You have to start with the framing, like a lot of society don't realize how critical space is to modern society. It's woven through everything, you know. And when people start to connect the fact that they can navigate around their cities, they can communicate in remote regions, that GPS signals, you know, drive the financial systems of the world with precise timing, to the climate, the ability to weather forecast. In Australia, all our weather forecasting relies on satellites, and it's the same all around the world. So making that connection that, you know, a day without space, it could be pretty challenging day. And it's both for our security, for protecting our planet and increasing our prosperity. Having satellite-enabled technologies in agriculture, you know, precision agriculture, where you can precisely plant and sow your crop. You can look at if the crop has disease, so maybe you won't water that crop, or you will fertilize it more. So you can make intelligent decisions. And there was a wonderful report recently by the World Economic Forum on the use of Earth observations, and I can't remember the exact number. I think it was 2 gigatons of CO2 reduction. And they model that from better decision making using satellite data. So really bringing it back to what matters here on Earth. You've certainly got the inspiration piece that's easy to sort of communicate, but the skills, you know, and those spin-off technologies that are proven again and again. And what's interesting for the world, we're in a new wave of exploration. NASA has the Artemis program. India's got amazing aspirations, and we're going to see more innovations come back to Earth.
Absolutely. Also, talking about your journey personally, you've been with the Australian Space Agency, heading it from the front now. But prior to that, you've also been at Virgin Galactic for, I think, in various roles. You've taken multiple roles there as well. So your engagement within the space industry also has a long history to it. So would you like to talk about some of your experiences with Virgin Galactic?
So I was very fortunate to join the Virgin Galactic team. We're very small, less than 10 employees in a small office in London, downtown office, and was fortunate to grow with the team and grow with the company, and was one of the first Virgin employees to move to the Mojave Desert. And this part of the Mojave Desert is where the US test all their fighter jets and rocket technologies, and so it's a land of, you know, sonic booms and quite a remarkable place. So many aerospace firsts. And I was out there able to build the factory and the team, and eventually we finished Virgin Space Unity, which has now flown to space several times. So it was a wonderful journey of technical development, and having been for that program, seeing how having a program like that just creates sort of fingers everywhere in terms of technology development, innovation, new startups, and looking where a lot of our team have gone. Now I had to move overseas to work in the space industry. And when the opportunity to apply for the head of the agency came up, I saw that as a way to reverse that.
Absolutely.
How can we develop an industry and capability the nation needs, and have jobs working on lunar rovers or satellites in Australia? And we have that now. And so very passionate to that. And as a way, not just for space, you know, across all the critical enabling parts of our economy, we need STEM specialists, both engineering but vocational.
Absolutely.
You know, the ability to build wiring harnesses, the ability to do friction stir welding. We need all these technologies for a high-tech economy.
That's a beautiful point that you brought in, that how we need different kind of professionals also coming in. We need engineers for sure, but we also need other professionals.
Absolutely.
I mean, I keep thinking about this. We are talking about having a moon habitation and everything. Of course, we need engineers to help us set it up, to look into how we can create habitable settlements there. But it's not enough to do just that. We'll also need, if we are actually planning to live there, however years or decades down the line, living there will need what kind of culture we have there, what kind of maybe policies we have there. And then to also have vocationalists, like you said, to be talking about why this is important or why we are doing it, and spreading that message across to people here on earth so that they understand and more of them become part of this whole human resource that we want to create going ahead for the industry. So I think it's very important, and this as a subject allows any and every kind of, I think, professional with any skill that they have and they want to come in and be a part of the space industry and have a passion for it, I think they can merge the two together. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it'd probably be a pretty boring place if you just had engineers designing a habitat for the moon. You need designers, you need artists. You need, obviously, people who understand human physiology very well. So it is a multidisciplinary approach, both within engineering, but outside of engineering. There's a deep, rich, emerging area still of space law. How do we put settlements on the moon? How do we do that in a way that's consistent with the space treaties or how they may evolve? There's a lot of work that needs to be done still in that area. So this is like any part of the economy, you need all the skills and all the resources to do it.
Now, so the industry is growing. We have so many more players at multiple levels. There again, policy becomes very important. What kind of laws will we have? Because we have certain treaties, we have UNOSA, but then is that enough? Because that is on a global level, but with every country, they'll have their own policies as well. So there again, I think policy and law become very important. So what is Australia's stand on that, and how do you see navigating through this whole policy law situation for your country and also globally?
We have the space treaties, and they provide a good overall framework. And there's something we rely on for international cooperation today. We're talking with our partners in India about crew rescue, should it be needed in the future, for example, and that's a part of the Outer Space Treaty.
Yes.
However, you need a domestic policy and a domestic act in order to make sure you can monitor your obligations to those treaties. So one of the very first things our space agency did, and I joined in 2021, but we were formed in 2018, was update Australia's Space Launch Act. So we have what's called the Space Launches and Return Act 2018. And this is a way for us to, make sure we can meet our international obligations under the space treaties and other treaties and international law, but also how we can ensure we have a responsible space sector in Australia as we develop spaceports, as companies look to launch rockets. So there needs to be a domestic aspect. And right now we're thinking hard about sustainability in space. Because the sustainability of our environment, I'm going a bit off track, is a global problem and need global solutions. But if the individual nation states aren't contributing and can demonstrate a responsible policy for sustainability, it's hard to have those negotiations on the global stage. So we're in the midst of sustainability of space policy work exactly for that reason. And so our agency was formed in some ways similar to InSpace. In the Indian context, with a regulator, we have a job to promote and invest in capability and see the ecosystem grow. And that's probably similar to many emerging space nations, right? Different model, but it's fit for purpose for Australia. But there's definitely other models out there
as well. Australia is an upcoming nation and now very actively participating in the global space scenario as well. So how does the industry and how does the scenario look like for a country which is relatively new in the space sector?
We're new and we're old. I'm going to come to that point. I'll come to your question. But firstly, we're very proud to have what we consider the world's oldest astronomers. So you may see my logo here, and it doesn't look like a normal space agency logo, a planet or a swish or a rocket. It's actually inspired by First Nations people's constellations who have looked to the sky to dictate seasonal activities for thousands of years, and a deep, rich connection to what they call sky country, but also how they use it to protect land. So we sort of have a very long history in Australia for space. And we were there at the beginning of the space age. We were one of the first nations to actually launch a satellite into space. Now, for various decisions, we came off that path, but we continue to have a depth in remote sensing and Earth observation and sort of data analytics side in particular. But if I fast forward to the mid-teens of this millennium, so 2015, 16, like you said, there was this realization that the ability to do things in space was shifting from the world's superpowers to startups. and commercial enterprises.
Absolutely.
And there's an opportunity for Australia with its comparative competitive strengths to lean in. And that was the genesis of we needed a space agency to coordinate to build those international partnerships. And, since that time, we've seen about 70% growth. When we thought about having an agency today in employees, we tracked over 600 organizations that work one way or another in space. So that's both industry, but also government and academia. And like India, obviously India has a rich and deep expertise, and we're honoured to have opportunities to partner. But it's an emerging commercial ecosystem. There's a large number of small to medium enterprises trying to scale and get contracts. And so we're actually on a similar trajectory, but obviously India's got a depth of expertise.
Right. And since you were addressing about how you had the employees and you're also growing, in terms of skill development and getting more people, what are some of the steps that you would say you've been taking at the Australian Space Agency in Australia, and you think that globally we can take to create that ecosystem where that skill development is happening in the right direction, to have that ecosystem that is strong enough for the ambitions that we all have for the space industry and the space economy going ahead?
There's been a few things we've done since the agency was formed. One of them, working with a partner in Australia, was to develop a taxonomy of what are the jobs in the space sector we need. And that's where we identified that there were skills like friction stir welding that we didn't have in Australia. And if you want to build launch vehicles or some of these integrated structures, you actually need these skill sets. So we did a taxonomy. We've worked with our Bureau of Statistics to update what's called the codes, basically how you categorize labor, to really understand the size, and that'll be flushed into future work with our Bureau of Statistics. We've done much on the inspiration side, so really tackling that pipeline of getting students and children youth into STEM. We've done it through a few ways. At our headquarters, we're headquartered in Adelaide in South Australia. We have the Australian Space Discovery Centre, much like the Science Gallery here. It's a place to connect with Australia's story in space, and that's been very successful. And from a design perspective, it's not a science museum. It's targeted to sort of 12 to 19-year-olds who are thinking about where they want to take their careers. So very targeted for the demographic. The other things we've done is some quite inspirational programs. We have a joint program with NASA that we call the National Indigenous Space Academy. And we just have sent the second cohort of First Nations graduates, science and engineering graduates, to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So looking at how we can also build a diverse workforce in Australia and leverage all Australians from all backgrounds. And then we have some primary school programs like Kids in Space, which is a 3D printing program. They're set a challenge, and then there's sort of a state and then a federal competition. So there are a few of the different things, and there's a whole story arc of storytelling. I'm sure we'll talk about our lunar rover, but we had a naming competition for our rover, and that reached thousands of kids in classrooms. And so there's some of the initiatives we've done to help develop the workforce.
How about we talk about that whole project, and definitely touch upon how did it reach and how did the name came in, because that's a very interesting story.
Happy to. So we are developing Australia's first really exoplanetary, outside Earth robotic mission. And so this is a small rover, a 20 to 25 kilogram rover that we will send to the surface of the moon with a NASA CLIPS mission later this decade. And that's the partnership with NASA, and we're very honoured to have that partnership. The mission of the rover is really to do science with lunar soil or regolith. And the reason we're doing this is the science and contributing to this next leap in global exploration and science, but really to show the world our expertise in robotics and automation. So Australia is a rich and prosperous country for our resources sector. And one of the things we lead the world in is operating mine sites that are 2,000 kilometres away remotely. And this is remotely with big autonomous vehicles in a harsh environment, interoperating with people. And we do that remotely. And if we can bring that sort of experience to space, and we're going to need that experience because the number of missions coming up, you can't have always a big control room to operate one site. You need a control room operating a territory. And so we want to use this as a way to demonstrate to the world our remote operations experience. So we just finished phase 1 of the program. So we've had 2 competing teams take the vehicles to a certain design stage we call preliminary design review. And at this point in time, we're assessing those proposals, and in the future, our minister will decide and award one of those teams to build and then operate the rover. And it's one of our most ambitious robotics projects. It's referenced in our nation's robotics strategy, for example.
And how did the naming competition go?
Yeah, the naming competition, we learned some lessons from some other global competitions, but we had a nationwide opportunity to submit names.
Yeah.
And we got thousands of entries. Then we had a panel of space historians, space technologists, storytellers, technologists. So a real diverse panel that down selected to 4 names. Okay. And then we put those 4 names to a public vote. And the one that came out was Ruva. So I was tying to our heritage and the kangaroo.
Yes. Which I think is very interesting, like you said, because it caters to the heritage of Australia itself and also the way that it has involved so many people. It's just, I think, very exciting. And I'm sure when it's out there, people will be so excited about it going out there. Talking of collaboration, and since you are in India, and Australia and India have a lot of partnerships and collaboration initiatives going on right now, specifically in the space domain. How has your interaction been with ISRO? There's InSpace, there's NSIS. So how have your interactions been, and how do you think this partnership is looking going ahead?
We have I think, a wonderful partnership with India. If I look at my time with the agency, when I started, and I can't take the credit, the team within the agency in Austrade and their Indian counterparts had worked on updating the MOU. So there's a memorandum of understanding between Israel and our government for space collaboration, and we renewed that in, I think it was like my 2nd month in the job. And that has been like a flower that's blossomed. Since then, a year later, we came to BSX 22. We have the comprehensive strategic partnership between our nations, and we saw in 2023, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Albanese announced that space was a key part of this, and our India investment program was launched. We've had industry roundtables, and we had one this week, and sort of fingers of collaboration are really coming together, both on the government side, and there's several things we're working with ISRO on in particular.
And can we also talk about Space Maitri? It's a very crucial partnership, and it has a lot of opportunities for both Indian and Australian counterparts coming together there. So I would love for you to speak about Space Maitri.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So when in the India, what we call the International Space Investment India Initiative, we awarded 3 projects to take forward 3 missions, actually. They're not just projects, these are missions that will see satellites go into orbit. The one you're referring to is led by a company called Space Machines Company. So they're going to work on a satellite. It'll be the largest ever Australian built satellite that will work on on-orbit servicing and space debris mitigation. So earlier we talked about sustainability. One thing all the space agencies of the world are looking to is how do we preserve access to space because of its criticality of life here on Earth. And so they're in this rapidly emerging market around on-orbit transportation and logistics. And all 3 projects are designed specifically to bring in Indian partners and to collaborate. And so there's, I guess, some things to cover there is we were honoured that the NSI chairman, Ayushee, was able to work with SMC, Space Machines Company, and get the first dedicated SSLV launch for this satellite, in a couple of years' time. But then this week we saw Space Machines Company sign 2 strategic partnerships with companies, Anand Technologies and Digantara. And there's other Australian and Indian organisations involved. So that mission's a space sustainability missions. The other 2, just briefly, one is a company called LATConnect 60 that is doing carbon emission monitoring at a very high resolution at low cost. And that will be part of a growing network of satellites that will actually tell us what our emissions are. We need to know that more accurately. And then the third is with an Australian company called Skycraft, who are looking at timing signals and for constellations, basically. I had a wonderful exchange with Professor Shankar at the Indian Institute of Science this week at the Centre for Nano Engineering Science, and they're doing collaboration with Australian University RMIT. So the program, I think, is is working. That's what we wanted it to do. And Space Machine certainly is the largest project we funded out of the three.
All right. Space is a very cost-intensive industry. The gestation periods are pretty long. The ROIs cannot be compared to other industries. How do you look at that, and what kind of thing you would say that the companies should be looking at or should be catering to if they want to sustainably stay in the long run in the space sector?
Yeah, it's a very competitive market for capital, not just for space, but for everything. And you're right, it does typically, not in all circumstances, require patient capital and a risk tolerance. But what I would say is, and particularly I think many governments around the world have known this and demonstrated, government dollars invested in space is very good. I think India recently, it was like $2.54 of benefit for every dollar invested, so 2.5 times. We've recently done a return on investment study on some of our early grants and a much higher multiple, and you see similar data from the European Space Agency and the UK Space Agency. But it is a tight market for funding. The Australian ecosystem is growing fast, and actually in the last few years we've seen several hundred millions of dollars of private investment. And typically when you get in private investment is, maybe there's a strategic connection, there's a particular technology that's needed, or it's not a space company. It's using space to deliver applications here on Earth.
It's strategically, when you're looking at investments and fundings, it's also about the kind of needs that you have that time and what kind of technology and solution they are offering. So there, I think it becomes important for companies to also look at not just what they are excited about in space, but what kind of applications are needed and what kind of applications can serve back on Earth.
Exactly.
All right. So I think that's the gist of what I was trying to understand from what you said.
I've got a good example. One of the earliest space companies in Australia was Fleet Space Technologies. And they started out and are still very much using Internet of Things from space. We worked with them as part of our Moon to Mars supply chain program to work on think of it as a sound sensor. So a sensor you put in the ground and you listen to vibrations in the ground.
Yeah.
It's called ambient noise tomography. They've been able to, with their proprietary software, this sensor and space connectivity, to radically change how you can search for critical minerals that we need for the green energy transition.
Okay.
So they've turned what was about $400,000 Australian grant from the Australian government into tens of millions of dollars of revenue, and it's generated some large capital raises for them. And it's because they're doing something the world needs is finding lithium, finding these deposits of critical minerals that the world desperately needs to transition. And so there you've got what was a space company delivering disruption and improved sustainability for resources extraction.
Oh, nice.
Right, that's where you're going to see significant investments.
Right.
Similarly, Skycraft is an Australian company building the constellation of satellites, and they received about $100 million private funding round because they're working on aviation safety and aviation communications. And so I think where you'll see the dollars going is, where is that application? Where is that customer on Earth? What does that need?
Right.
That's investable.
That's investable. And one of the companies also, like you mentioned in India, is Digantara that you are working with, and they focus specifically on SSA, space situational awareness, and space debris is something that keeps coming on and off in discussions now. A lot of times we have, I think, one set of people in the industry who are definitely very concerned when it comes to space debris, that now that we have so many more launches, many more satellites going up, and not all, we are still working towards deorbiting technologies. Those are still being tested. So some of them are really worried that there might be instances when we have certain, clashes, we might have hindrances when it comes to our signals, etc. We also have many of our astronomers who worry about that if there are so many satellites, their astronomy is disturbed when they are looking out in the sky in the future if there are so many of them. There are animations and images where you see Earth and there's like an entire orbit of just satellites going around it. But of course, there's also a set of people who think that that's how the industry grows. So you will have more satellites, you will have more launches going in, and we learn to navigate through it. It might not be that big a concern, but what are your thoughts on that, and how important is space sustainability in space?
It's a balance. Well, first to the last point, it's very important. Now, it's a balance of allowing that progress and innovation to get this data we need for space and get these critical services we need for space. It's essential to the modern economies of the world. So we have to preserve access. right? And we have to put technology up there. We're a proud astronomy nation, both to our First Nations astronomers, but if you look at what we do with radio astronomy, SKA and others, our astronomers are concerned. And
Australia has a great astronomy history.
Yeah. So, even in our role, we've got to, think about all our constituents and support them. So we were proud to work with other nations to get dark and quiet skies on the agenda at the United Nations Committee on Peace, Use of Space. That takes a while. Working in those multilateral fora takes time, but that's important. It's not just dark skies, and often in astronomy, it's the dark spaces between that are meaningful. But also quiet, radio quiet is important for, obviously radio astronomy and other things. So that's why we're working on the sustainability policy. I think there is, and part of making space more sustainable, this is where companies like Digantata come in, is actually knowing what's up there, is characterising it. So we call that space situational awareness. And that's something we think Australia has good strengths in. We have a very big view of the sky if you look at our territory. And we have a lot of interesting technologies such as passive radar to look up. And of interest, I don't know if you knew this, Digantata was incubated at the University of South Australia in their Venture Catalyst program. So again, the layers of the onion in their collaboration are deep, which is fantastic. So it's a balance. Clearly, I think more and more, we need to build satellites more reliably. They're going to operate. The European Space Agency is looking to bring partners into a zero debris charter into the future, and that's something we'll consider as part of our sustainability work ahead of our space congresses that are focused on our sustainability. So it's an active area of work. It is important. I mean, some of the visualizations are sometimes not helpful. Like, the size of a satellite or a piece of debris relative to the size of Earth, you wouldn't see it in a scale, right? So the simulations don't probably proportionately represent the problem. However, the number of potential conjunctions per day is growing rapidly. And so a conjunction, think of two probability clouds coming together, right? Because you don't, it's, as you orbit the Earth, there's atmospheric disturbances, there's different gravity. So your orbit changes. And so you don't really know with precision exactly where your satellite is. And so, and as you get closer, you get some more data. But the number of those conjunctions, we call them, there's a technical term, are growing rapidly. And that's a concern, because many of the satellites can't move, or the debris can't move clearly. And so at some point, if you look at, and there's good visualizations, if you look at sort of a time view of space, they're gonna hit at some point. What do we do with that? How do we prepare for it? What can we do to mitigate it? It's all active, and from the UK Space Agency to commercial companies like Astroscale, there's a lot of people focused on this.
Since we were also talking about Moon and then your rover there, Chandrayaan-3 was one mission that I think in India, it's been a great success, and we still all talk about it. I mean, for us who are part of the industry and who were there watching it right from here, it gave us goosebumps. It still does. And it just brought so many people in India getting so excited about space, so many of them suddenly interested in space to see something like that actually happening. And there again, we had some kind of a collaboration that Australia and India had on Chandrayaan-3 mission as well. So would you like to touch upon that?
Well, firstly, we drew great inspiration. I had goosebumps watching the crowds at the launch, the landing, knowing that we'll have our rover one day on the surface of the moon. Also quite daunting, we've got a lot of work to do. But no, Australia was proud. One of the things Australia has done for a long time in space is be part of NASA and ESA's deep space networks. And so our tracking facilities, I think in Western Australia and in Australia, with the CSIRO and the European Space Agency, were there to capture that landing, capture the initial science. And we're so proud to have been part of it, and going into the future, we'll continue to support these space missions.
And we also have collaboration on Gaganyaan that we have with Australia on our crewed mission.
I mean, Gaganyaan an inspirational program. We're honoured to have the opportunity to partner with India on this program. So there's two initial things we're working on that we've talked about publicly. One is, if you look at the trajectory of the vehicle for both applications, is that we have an Australian territory, external territory called Cocos-Keeling Islands. And it's in a prime position to assist with tracking in the early stages of the launch over the Indian Ocean. Similarly, as you track the flight, you sort of cut the roughly speaking, the corner of Western Australia, maybe around the bottom, if there's any abort scenarios, and obviously none of us wish for that. How can the Australian government help with crew rescue type contingencies? And so we're working on some government to government agreements to manage those two things. Longer term, we're having discussions about how can we contribute Australian scientists and commercial entities, perhaps bring technologies, bring innovation to support what's a very long arc of development that India is looking at with the Shandar program. Just this week they announced a whole expansion. It's something we feel we can help and we can bring technologies to, and as a good partner in the region, we're excited about that.
Definitely, and I think it's all very exciting. We have a lot of collaborative missions coming in. Just in general, space industry right now, I think globally is very, very excited, very charged up. We have ambitions of going to Mars and moons. So what do you think? How far are we from reaching to the moon, to Mars? We have Artemis coming across. So what are your thoughts on that?
It takes time, right?
Definitely.
I'm not big on the cliche space is hard, but it is hard, and the development cycles are long. And when there's humans involved, we need to, take extra care. But there's very rapid disruption happening, right? The cost of launch has gone down. You've moved from a model as a business where launch is possibly the biggest risk, or your biggest cost, and now it's just it's part of the profit and loss statement. It has changed significantly in many cases, but I think I'm very confident we'll see humans return to the moon, and I think there's a genuine commitment from partners that NASA has for a sustainable presence, and there's other programs. I think the opportunity in low Earth orbit is still evolving. So we've talked about on-orbit logistics, as we see commercial LEO destinations come online. On-orbit manufacturing. So when you can do things in microgravity, or in the absence of sort of normal gravity here on Earth, well, you're not in the absence of it, but you're falling, as you know, but you take out sort of the first order effects of the physics, right? So the way you can build pharmaceuticals or manufacture pharmaceuticals, the way you can, and I learned this when I visited the European Space Agency. We recently had Catherine Bedell-Pegg go through training there. And one of the key astronauts that trained the astronauts at the center, worked on insulation or concrete type materials in space, because on Earth it's quite hard to model. It's almost empirical. But if you take out sort of the acceleration of gravity, you can see the second and third order effects, and you can better simulate that on Earth, and that'll have benefits in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions, for example. So I'm pretty excited about what we'll see in on-orbit manufacturing. Australia, we feel, is a destination that can accept returns from space, and we did that with our Japanese counterparts JAXA in 2020, just before I started. And we're working with commercial partners like VADA that are doing pharmaceutical manufacturing, looking how they can safely and responsibly land on Earth. And we have a geography and relatively unpopulated areas to do that.
And I think space medicine, like you touched upon, is again another huge sector that we have been working on. That it's not relatively new, but there's so much more potential there itself, and how it can help life on Earth, and not just in the future when we go and live in space, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know well how the human body struggles in space, right? Long duration missions, whether it's, your bones weakening, and that has parallels to osteoporosis here on Earth, other sort of physical effects. So there's a big tie back to developing medicines and treatments for diseases on Earth, learning from humans in space. And then you have like VADA and other companies doing the pharmaceutical manufacturing, or the synthesis of drugs. We have a rich, and this was delightfully surprising to me coming in store, we have a rich applied space medicine and life sciences community in Australia. Comes from our work in Antarctica and remote medicine, and we have companies, universities like La Trobe that do work in this area as well.
Yes. And you've had collaborations with ESA, NASA, JAXA, ISRO. How crucial is collaboration when it comes to an industry like space? Because I think this is not an industry that you can just solely go there. We have to collaboratively approach to sustain it in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, back to the formation of our agency, one of the reasons we were formed is we didn't really have that front door for NASA, for ESA to collaborate in a whole of government sense with Australia, and that was one of the key reasons the government founded the agency at that time. So a big part of my role is working with our counterparts and amazing counterparts like Chairman Somanath and Chairman Goenka, is to build those relationships. If you put an object into low Earth orbit, it's visiting the whole planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sharing of data from the World Space Agencies, contributes to our understanding of our planet.
Yeah.
This is all very valuable international cooperation.
Right. And since we talked about LEO, we talked about humans being in space. We've been in space, sort of living there on the International Space Station for some time. Mm-hmm. We might take some more time to reach Moon and then Mars, but being in space itself has been something that's very exciting. And you've worked on Unity and you see how Virgin Galactic is, people are now reaching space and space tourism is coming up. What are your thoughts on that? How exciting do you think that is for people to go there and please get the view of the Earth?
Yeah, I mean, astronauts talk about the overview effect. I've never experienced, but I do think getting that perspective, we're one planet, I think is something the world needs more than ever. It was fascinating. 2 weeks ago, we had the record for the most humans in space at the same time at 19 when we had the Polaris Dawn and the Soyuz launch. So, we've had humans in space now continuously for 20 plus years.
Yes.
I think we are at an inflection point where we're going to see that grow.
Okay.
And it's not just for joyrides. It's and I'm not saying they're not joyride. What I mean is it's science, it's high-tech innovation to build these vehicles. Everything we do in space, we do here on Earth.
We do here.
Right, it's jobs on Earth.
Right.
It's manufacturing on Earth.
Would you ever take that chance and go and see that whole Earth perspective from there, take that view? Had you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I think like many in the sector, it's probably a long ambition. As I said, Dr. Thomas was an inspiration. So it'd be a great way to finish the story arc. But I'm focused on, ensuring Australia and the government can get the benefits it needs from space to support its objectives. And ensure we space, for many countries is about prosperity, it's about security, it's about our planet, and ensuring we can continue to access that.
And hopefully see more humans in space, more Australians, more Indians out there in space doing science, doing exploration, right? Yeah,
and Gaganyaan, when they launch, that'll be India will be the fourth country to put humans into orbit, which is fantastic.
Very exciting and very inspiring also. What are your thoughts on more life beyond humans out there?
I mean, we're discovering how many planets are out there, and it's mind-boggling, right? We always think about it's mind-boggling how many galaxies and how many stars there are, but scientists have shown nearly every star has planets. Yes. So it's unimaginable that somewhere else the conditions haven't formed life. Now, is it intelligent? Is it all life's intelligent, but I mean, is it, has it become multi-celled? I don't know. So time will tell. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if we get that rock back from Shivaya Falls.
That I think is very exciting when that rock comes back and we study that and see how that is.
What does that tell us? But, I think it's a long journey ahead of us. Some of the advances, actually, in some of the deep collaboration I saw at Sensi at IASC in optical frequency combs. That's going to support astrobiology work and future telescopes looking at planets. And so I think there's a whole voyage of discovery still to go there.
And even in that terms, even asteroid mining and stuff, getting minerals from there, all of that is very exciting how much humans are trying to do. And it tells us about the kind of minerals that might just be there out there for us. So any thoughts, any plans when it comes to
plans. As I said, we're focused on space for life on Earth right now. But I mean, unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the company, but about a month ago or 2 months ago, there was a space resources company that did about a $40 million raise. So there's definitely still venture capital going into this. I think there's work to do with our space treaties. NASA's Psyche. They're going to an asteroid that is predicted to have, a tremendous amount of metals. We're going to learn a lot. So I think it's probably further afield, I think, but there's investment going into that right now. And then once you're on the moon permanently, finding water accessing water, seeing how you can maybe build things in situ.
Yeah.
That's going to drive another innovation cycle as well.
What kind of opportunities do students have if they're interested in space, and what kind of opportunities that Australia can offer to the students?
Yeah, so as we've seen our space ecosystem commercially grow in Australia, it's also grown on the academic side. So I track in my head probably at least 12 universities in Australia that have a space program of some sort. Some are developing CubeSats, some obviously our depth in astronomy, space situational awareness, how we can do bushfire detection from space, frequency combs we talked about. One that I'm particularly excited about is Australia has in our Department of Education, Australian Research Council Award Centres of Excellence. We have a Centre of Excellence in plants for space. So this is multiple universities, including the University of Adelaide, right next door to the agency's headquarters, that are looking at how you grow a leafy. It's a plant. It's not a algae. It's a plant that grows on ponds. It's called duckweed. And they're looking how you can synthesize proteins, synthesize plastic, synthesize medicines in space. And obviously for long duration missions, you need all of those things. What's fascinating though is if you can do that and you can do it in space, this will have benefits for food security and water scarcity on Earth. So again, there's that spin back. And so they're doing some amazing science with partners with NASA and around the world as well. So there's actually a lot of opportunities for students to get in. Our rover program, we've seen student teams. So Australia actually does pretty well in global rover competitions. A couple of years ago, Monash University Pink Rover did very well. And we've seen them graduate and work on the two competing teams, for example. So there's also opportunities. We've got companies like Gilmore building sovereign rockets. So actually there's both study opportunities and now jobs as graduates. That was when I left Australia in 2005, we didn't have that. For students interested in this space, IAC and the great work the Space Generation Advisory Council do is a prime opportunity. So we'll host IAC from the 29th September to the 4th of October next year in Sydney. This will bring potentially up to 10,000 of the global space community to Sydney. It's hosted by our Space Industry Association of Australia, and we all see this as an IAC for the region. This is a chance to showcase space technologies from the region, how critical space is to the region, and I think for students thinking about careers or study, it'd be a great place to network.
What are you looking forward to when it comes to space exploration? What are you most excited about?
I think, Artemis, generally speaking. Apollo generated a generation of scientists, engineers. It was a wave of innovation. Technology is still doing it. Artemis is the sister of Apollo. There are billions of people on this planet, including me. They didn't see humans on the moon with their own eyes. That opportunity is coming again. And so I think that's the nearest one. And the work we're going to have to do to make it happen across agencies and commercial entities and government, and to make it sustainable, which is NASA's goal. I think just this sort of time is very interesting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Enrico, for taking the time. All the best for all the things that you're doing, and hopefully we'll have a lot more collaboration coming in from Australia with India and other countries as well. And yes, let's hope for Artemis to come by, and even Gaganyaan hopefully.
Gaganyaan, the Ayushee said Gaganyaan.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.